You are welcome to Africa Uncovered YouTube channel from wherever you are watching us. We are glad that you're part of this broadcast, that you're part of this channel. Now, today we're going to be discussing yet again the riots or demonstrations in Kenya and how far they've come. Now, we all understand that for a number of weeks, if not months, there's been uprisings in Kenya that have seen over 40 people dead and scores injured. Now, this came as a result of a bill that was being passed, as we all know, the finance bill that was on the table of the president, awaiting for his approval to be passed into law, which in turn was reversed as people took on the streets to demonstrate against this bill. Now, the demonstrators, who call themselves Generation Z, were able to at one point achieve a success, and that is in regard to ensuring that the bill was not, signed off by the president, who took it back to the parliament. And taking it back to the parliament essentially means that he has not approved it. Now, so many things have, transpired ever since then and today, and the demonstrations have not ceased to go on in Kenya. And at one point, we saw these people, the rioters, the demonstrators, you can call them Generation Z, walking towards Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, where they were queried. Now, in one of our videos, we were saying, or we said, that the demonstrations in Kenya, the riots in Kenya, were going to become worse before becoming better. Now, we've seen a lot of people pour themselves on the streets. There are thousands and thousands of people on the streets, and then the police also doing its job of trying to query the demonstrations. So many people have been injured, so many have been killed, and a lot is still going on. Now, today we wanted to look at, something in line with that. There's been rumors that apparently the police of Uganda and that of Tanzania are in existence in Nairobi. If you have not heard me, I can repeat it. The Uganda police and the police of Tanzania are having their footsteps in Kenya, are having their presence in Kenya. Now, I remember in one of my videos that I was doing, you can revisit them, about the demonstrations in Kenya, where I was urging the president of Kenya, President William Ruto, doctor, to seek for advice, if not assistance, from his neighbors. And it seems that if these reports are to go by, if these reports are indeed true, he's been able to listen. Because it seems, Dr. William Ruto seems to have lost hope in his police, because we remember at one point where he came out, where he came out in public and said that he has the worst head of police in the world. That was a big statement that led to the IGP, Inspector General of Police of Kenya in this case, to resign from his position when he heard of this and probably had failed to query the demonstrations in Kenya. You see, the situation of Kenya is tricky when they're demonstrating, because Kenya is that person who is in between. You are democratic, you want to show that you're democratic, but at the same time you have this element that brings out the Africanism, the hardness in you. So you are lost in limbo. You want to be democratic, but you're not. And this is what we have basically seen during the demonstrations in Kenya, where the police preliminarily failed to query the demonstrations because at one point they wanted to demonstrate leniency, to demonstrate that they are a democratic country and people have their freedoms to demonstrate. Now, the demonstrations escalated from being mere demonstrations to riots, and from being riots to a state of quagmire that saw so many infrastructures demolished, including the Uganda House, and also the rioters attacking the parliament. Now, going back to the issue of the Ugandan police and the Tanzanian police report that there is their presence in Kenya. Now, this to me does not come as a surprise. It doesn't, because the level at which these demonstrations had gone wanted, or, indeed wanted someone who is not going to show lenience with these demonstrators. We're not saying that go on the streets and start shooting people, but tactically knowing how to control the demonstrations. And we all know that Uganda police, together definitely with other sister security agencies, are ultimate on point of querying demonstrations. Like we saw on 23rd of July, where there were meant to be demonstrations in Uganda, and they were a total flop, because we had previously in another video told you that whatever was happening in Kenya could not happen in Uganda, and the Generation Z replica of Ugandans were trying to copy what was happening in Kenya to do it in Uganda, which was a total failure. In the first day of demonstrations, not even 500 people were on the streets. Later on, the second or third or fourth day, and now it died a natural death. Some of them were reprimanded and taken to court, others given bails, and others probably are still there. So that is how you deal with demonstrations. You plan before, you plan in advance. I remember telling you here that these demonstrators of Uganda who took on social media, just exactly like the way the Generation Z of Kenya did, to plan for their demonstrations, were just planning for their arrest. Because the Ugandan security agencies would definitely dig to the last person to know who the orchestrators were. And indeed, they were neutralized even before the start of the demonstrations. So, if Kenya, William Ruto, borrowed assistance or requested for assistance from his neighbors, it is something that was indeed expected, because Uganda would definitely deal with these demonstrators in Kenya, not in a bad way of, beating them up and, so many things, but they are tactically positioned in such a way that they can deal with the demonstrators. And in no space, by the way, you will not hear any sound of demonstrations in Kenya if the Uganda police and definitely maybe ISO and ESO are already in existence. As we said, these are reports, alleged reports, because there's one of the demonstrators in Kenya who took on social media and said, can you imagine that the Uganda police and the Tanzania police are in Kenya to query the demonstrations? So it is based on that we've done that video, that hypothetically, if there is existence of the Uganda police and probably backed up with the Tanzania police in Kenya, then expect no demonstrations anymore. In less than a month, if not just weeks, there will be no demonstrations in Kenya, because the people that have brought in know how to deal with demonstrations. So where does this leave whatever that Generation Z have been planning? Definitely it leaves them in limbo. So many of them will be arrested. Others will probably be killed. Others will be tried. Others will just get lost. And yeah, that's how it is probably likely to turn out. Because we remember there's also been stories that most of the demonstrators, especially those who orchestrated the demonstrations, for weeks now have been disappearing one by one. Others being found dead, others disappearing definitely, and probably others are in safe houses and whatever. So it seems the job to weed out the demonstration has been going on in Kenya for a number of weeks. And now if there is an addition of the Ugandan police, and then just know, soon or later, all this will be history. But how did it come to this point? It came to this point by the level, by the sheer weakness of the president of Kenya, for thinking that at one point he could play democracy and autocracy at the same point. Okay? You are either a dictator or you're not. You cannot be somewhere in there. You want to query the demonstration, but you want to show that you're democratic. Now you go against your word, and then, you know, they eventually find they find you weak, and that's what the Generation Z clung on and prioritized. That's what they basically based on to demonstrate the way they demonstrated, by starting coding off the bill, and then, you know, they eventually, after the bill was dropped, then they called for the resignation. No, they called for the resignation of, you know, ministers and all that. When that was done and they felt it wasn't important, they went ahead to call for the resignation of the president, and that's where the things turned around, and probably William Ruto opened ears to know that whoever he's dealing with is just not basically day-to-day demonstrators, but people who are probably have Western influence, who have a backing. And we remember at one point he pointed out one of the international organizations being the funders of these demonstrations, because he was asking himself, how do these people feed who are on the streets daily? How do they feed? Where do they get the food? How do they survive? So when he was digging through his security, he found out that one of the companies, international companies, organizations that are in presence in Kenya were indeed, you know, financing these demonstrations. And it is not new, it is not news, because we know that most of the demonstrations that happen in Africa are always orchestrated by the West. There is always a funding that comes through to the demonstrators from the West. So if that same thing has been happening in Kenya, then it is indeed true. But the mere fact that he's been able to call on the help of the neighbors, especially the Uganda police, then I can assure you that in no time the demonstrations will be normal, and Kenya will return to normalcy, but his pride will never return, because he lost it at the point he changed his words. He swallowed his words and bent towards what the demonstrators were saying in that guise of saying that he's too democratic. But let's hope that he has learned a lesson, so that next time if something like this comes up, he will be fit and ready. Otherwise, from me to you, I am TJ, and that's what I thought we would discuss here on Africa Uncovered, you know, bringing you the geopolitics of Africa and the world at large. And now today we were concentrating on Kenya and what's happening in Kenya. Otherwise, I see you. Adios.